Imagine this. What if everything you believed about intelligence, its value, its glory, its promise of a better life, was completely wrong? What if being smart or even striving for genius wasn't the gift we've been led to believe, but actually a burden, a curse, even a source of profound unhappiness? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you might never want to be a genius again. Arthur Schopenhauer, one of history's most provocative and misunderstood philosophers, held a view so radical that it continues to shock thinkers even today. He believed that intelligence, far from being a blessing, carries with it hidden dangers that few understand. These dangers, Schopenhauer argued, can rob us of peace, happiness, and even the ability to truly enjoy life. Today we'll explore his hidden insight about intelligence, why smart people so often act like complete idiots, what he saw that others missed, and how it could forever change the way you view your own mind. You've seen it happen. The brilliant professor who can't manage basic relationships, the genius inventor who falls for obvious scams, the intellectual who defends ridiculous political views. Why does this happen? Is it just a quirk, or is there something deeper going on? Schopenhauer thought he had the answer, and it's not what you might expect. Schopenhauer was a man deeply acquainted with the struggles of life. Born in 1788 in what is now Gdansk, Poland, his philosophy was profoundly shaped by a world filled with suffering, uncertainty, and disillusionment. While his contemporaries were focused on grand ideals of progress and reason, Schopenhauer chose to look into the shadows of the human condition. He wasn't interested in flattering us with comforting lies about human potential. Instead, he exposed uncomfortable truths. And one of his most striking revelations was about the strange disconnect between intelligence and wisdom. In his masterwork, The World is Will and Representation, Schopenhauer developed a view of human nature that helps explain why smart people often act foolishly. Unlike most Western philosophers, who celebrated human reason as our crowning achievement, Schopenhauer saw intelligence as merely a tool, and not always a helpful one. To Schopenhauer, intelligence wasn't simply the ability to solve problems or accumulate knowledge. It was a double-edged sword that could elevate us to great heights, but also plunge us into the depths of absurdity. He believed that intelligence, particularly the kind we typically measure and celebrate, often blinds us to deeper truths about ourselves and reality. Think about it. Have you ever noticed that the more specialized someone's knowledge becomes, the more ridiculous they can be in other areas of life? That's exactly what Schopenhauer was getting at. Here's the paradox he revealed. Our intelligence doesn't rule our actions, it serves them. And what it serves isn't our rational self-interest, but something much more primal and irrational. Schopenhauer called this force the will. The will, according to Schopenhauer, is the fundamental essence of all existence. A blind, irrational, striving force that manifests in humans as desire, craving, and endless wanting. It's what makes us tick, what drives us forward, what makes us want things even when getting them doesn't actually make us happy. And here's the kicker. Our much celebrated intellect isn't the master of this will, it's the servant. Man can do what he wants, Schopenhauer wrote, but he cannot will what he wants. In other words, your desires aren't chosen by your rational mind. They arise from deeper, unconscious sources. Your intellect just comes up with reasons to justify what your will already wants. This explains one of the strangest things about smart people. They don't use their intelligence to find truth so much as to defend what they already believe or want. The smarter someone is, the better they are at rationalizing their existing positions, desires, and biases. You've seen this happen. The brilliant lawyer who can defend any position, no matter how absurd. The genius who uses their intelligence not to discover truth, but to shore up their ego. The academic who constructs elaborate theories to justify what are, at bottom, just personal preferences or cultural biases. Modern psychologists call this motivated reasoning, and studies show that more intelligent people are often more susceptible to it, not less. Why? Because they're better at coming up with clever justifications for what they already want to believe. A striking example comes from a study by Yale researcher Dan Kahan. He found that as scientific literacy and numeracy increased, people didn't become more accurate in their assessment of politically charged scientific issues like climate change. Instead, they became more polarized along political lines. Their greater intelligence just made them better at finding reasons to support their team's position. This flies in the face of our common belief that intelligence leads to truth. Smart people, it turns out, aren't immune to foolishness. They're often just better at defending it. But Schopenhauer's insights go even deeper. He understood something that modern psychology now confirms. Intelligence is domain-specific. Being brilliant in one area doesn't make you wise in others. Consider the phenomenon of expert blindness. This is when specialists become so focused on their area of expertise that they develop massive blind spots about everything else. The finance genius who can't understand basic human emotions. The brilliant scientist who falls for pseudo-scientific health fads. The chess grandmaster who makes terrible life decisions. Nobel Prize-winning physicist Richard Feynman observed this phenomenon when he noted how many of his brilliant colleagues fell for obvious scams and cults. Their specialized intelligence didn't translate into general wisdom. Schopenhauer wouldn't be surprised. He believed that our intellect evolved not to discover universal truths, but to help us survive and reproduce. It's a tool for practical purposes, not a window into the absolute nature of reality. This is why even geniuses can be complete idiots outside their domains of expertise. Their intelligence is like a spotlight, illuminating one small area brilliantly while leaving everything else in darkness. But what makes this even worse is that intelligence often creates overconfidence. Studies consistently show that experts overestimate their abilities in areas outside their expertise. The more you know about one subject, the more you tend to believe you're competent in unrelated fields. Intelligence, in other words, doesn't just fail to protect us from foolishness, it can actively contribute to it through the overconfidence it creates. This explains the phenomenon of ultra-crepidarianism, the habit of giving opinions and advice on matters outside of one's knowledge or competence. Smart people do this constantly, believing their intelligence in one domain qualifies them to speak authoritatively about everything. We see this whenever a famous scientist pronounces on politics, or when a brilliant technologist decides they understand philosophy better than philosophers. Their intelligence doesn't stop them from being foolish. It enables their foolishness by convincing them they can't be wrong. But perhaps the most profound insight from Schopenhauer about smart people's idiocy comes from his understanding of the relationship between intellect and emotion. For Schopenhauer, our intellect sits atop a vast ocean of unconscious drives and desires. We like to think our rational mind is in charge, making decisions based on evidence and logic. But Schopenhauer knew better. Our intellect is more like a lawyer defending a client, our will, whose decisions have already been made based on emotional and instinctual factors we're not even aware of. This explains why brilliant people still make terrible romantic choices, fall into destructive habits, or pursue goals that make them miserable despite their intelligence telling them better. Their smarts can't override their deeper emotional drives. Modern neuroscience strongly supports this view. Antonio Damasio's work with brain-damaged patients showed that people who lose their ability to feel emotions also lose their ability to make decisions, even when their logical faculties remain intact. Reason, it turns out, cannot function properly without emotion. And yet, many highly intelligent people believe they can think their way out of emotional problems or suppress their emotions through sheer force of intellect. This attempt to use intelligence to override fundamental aspects of human nature is, according to Schopenhauer, not just futile, but harmful. The greatest wisdom, he wrote, consists in reducing our desires, not in increasing our means of satisfying them. Yet how many smart people do exactly the opposite, using their intelligence to acquire more and more, never addressing the root issue of desire itself? The smarter you are, the better you might be at accumulating wealth, status, and achievements. But none of these things address the fundamental problem Schopenhauer identified, the restless striving of the will that's never satisfied for long. This explains the peculiar unhappiness that often accompanies high intelligence. Studies consistently show only modest correlations between IQ and life satisfaction, and some suggest that beyond a certain point, higher intelligence may actually be associated with less happiness. Why? Because intelligent people are more aware of what could go wrong, more sensitive to life's inevitable disappointments, and often more isolated from others. Their intelligence doesn't shield them from suffering. It can amplify it. And here we arrive at another reason smart people act foolishly: social disconnection. Schopenhauer, famously antisocial himself, understood how intelligence can isolate people. The smarter you are, the fewer people you can relate to as intellectual equals. This isolation can lead to a dangerous detachment from common sense and social norms. Intelligence often creates a kind of social tone deafness. The brilliant person who can't understand why their logically correct but deeply hurtful statement upset everyone. The genius who doesn't grasp why others don't share their obsessive interests. The intellectual who can't communicate without being condescending. These social failures aren't separate from intelligence. They're often direct consequences of it. When you live primarily in the realm of abstract thought, you can lose touch with the concrete, emotional reality most people inhabit. This explains the stereotype of the absent-minded professor or the socially awkward genius. It's not just a coincidence that brilliant people often struggle socially. Their intelligence pulls them into abstract realms where most people can't or don't want to follow. Schopenhauer observed that highly intelligent people often feel like aliens in human society. It is the same with a genius as with a corpse, he wrote somewhat morbidly, which, as Egyptian antiquity teaches, begins to emit light when it has become absolutely decomposed. In corruption, it begins to shine. This isolation can create a dangerous feedback loop. Cut off from the moderating influence of social connection, intelligent people can develop increasingly bizarre and detached worldviews. Think of the brilliant but isolated individuals who fall down conspiracy theory rabbit holes or develop grandiose messianic delusions. Their intelligence doesn't protect them from these errors. It enables them by giving them the cognitive tools to construct elaborate justifications for increasingly detached beliefs. We see this pattern in cults, where leaders are often highly intelligent people who use their intellect to construct elaborate belief systems disconnected from reality. Their followers aren't necessarily unintelligent. They're often quite smart, but use their intelligence to rationalize rather than question the leader's teachings. So if intelligence often leads to foolishness rather than wisdom, what's the solution? Should we all strive to be less intelligent? Schopenhauer's answer might surprise you. While he didn't suggest abandoning intelligence, he emphasized the importance of understanding its limitations and developing other qualities to balance it. The first step, according to Schopenhauer, is simply awareness. Recognizing that your intellect is not an impartial judge, but a servant of deeper drives is crucial. This self-awareness can help you catch yourself when you're using your intelligence to rationalize rather than discover truth. Ask yourself, am I using my intelligence to find the truth or to defend what I already believe or want? This simple question can be surprisingly revealing. The next step is to cultivate what Schopenhauer called the art of not reading. In our terms, this means being selective about what information you consume. Intelligent people often pride themselves on consuming vast amounts of information, but Schopenhauer warned that this can crowd out original thought and reflection. The art of not reading, he wrote, is a very important one. It consists in not taking an interest in whatever may be engaging the attention of the general public at any particular time. In today's terms, this might mean limiting social media, news consumption, and even academic literature to make space for deep, original thinking. The most intelligent fools are often those who know a vast amount, but understand very little. Schopenhauer also emphasized the importance of direct experience over abstract knowledge. Every man takes the limits of his own field of vision for the limits of the world, he wrote. This is especially true for intelligent people who may rely too heavily on their conceptual understanding rather than direct experience. To counter this, he recommended what we might now call mindfulness, direct, immediate engagement with the present moment. When you're fully present, the endless chatter of the intellect quiets down, and you can experience reality more directly. This is particularly important for highly intelligent people who often live in their heads rather than in the world. Their abstract thinking can create a barrier between themselves and direct experience, leading to a kind of dissociation from reality. You've probably met people like this, brilliant individuals who can theorize endlessly about life, but seem oddly detached from living it. They analyze relationships instead of having them, theorize about happiness rather than experiencing it, and turn everything into an intellectual problem to be solved rather than an experience to be lived. Another key insight from Schopenhauer was the importance of recognizing the limits of rational problem solving. Some of life's most important questions, about meaning, value, and purpose, cannot be answered through pure intellect. The concept, he wrote, is useless for art. It is precisely where knowledge serves the will that it achieves its greatest perfection. In other words, abstract concepts are tools for practical purposes, not keys to ultimate understanding. This is why so many intelligent people fail to find satisfaction despite their intellectual achievements. They're trying to solve existential problems with conceptual tools designed for practical tasks. This explains the stereotype of the nihilistic intellectual or the depressed genius. When you rely exclusively on abstract reasoning to find meaning and purpose, you're using the wrong tool for the job. What's the alternative? For Schopenhauer, it was aesthetic contemplation, the direct, intuitive appreciation of beauty in art and nature. In moments of aesthetic experience, he believed, we temporarily step outside the endless striving of the will and experience a kind of peace. When you're moved by a piece of music, captivated by a painting, or awestruck by natural beauty, you're momentarily freed from the tyranny of desire and the endless chattering of the intellect. These experiences provide a glimpse of what Schopenhauer called will-less knowing, a direct, intuitive understanding that transcends concepts. This is why many brilliant people find solace in art, music, or nature when their intellect fails to provide answers to life's deepest questions. These experiences offer a different kind of knowledge, immediate, intuitive, and complete in a way that conceptual understanding can never be. But perhaps Schopenhauer's most profound insight about overcoming the pitfalls of intelligence comes from his ethics of compassion. In his view, the ultimate antidote to intellectual foolishness is not more knowledge but greater compassion. Why? Because compassion breaks down the barrier between self and other that intellect tends to reinforce. When you truly feel another's suffering as your own, you transcend the narrow perspective of individual consciousness that makes intelligent people so prone to error and delusion. Compassion, Schopenhauer wrote, is the basis of morality. Not reasoning, not principles, not abstract theories of justice, but the direct, felt experience of shared suffering. This insight has profound implications for intelligent people. It suggests that the path to wisdom doesn't lead through more learning, more analysis, or more theory, but through greater empathy and compassion. The truly wise person, in Schopenhauer's view, isn't the one who knows the most, but the one who can transcend their individual perspective through compassion for others. This is why sometimes the simplest people can display profound wisdom despite limited intelligence or education. You've probably experienced this yourself. The professor who knows everything about their subject but lacks basic human decency. The intellectual who can talk brilliantly about ethics but treats people terribly. The genius who understands everything except what matters most. These contradictions arise because intelligence alone doesn't lead to wisdom. Wisdom requires something more, the ability to transcend the narrow perspective of the individual intellect through compassion and direct experience. So what does all this mean for you? What can you learn from Schopenhauer's insights about the strange relationship between intelligence and foolishness? First, be suspicious of your own rationalizations. When you find yourself using your intelligence to justify something you already want or believe, pause and consider whether you're seeking truth or just defending your desires. Second, don't mistake domain-specific expertise for general wisdom. Being brilliant in one area doesn't make you wise in others. Cultivate the humility to say, "I don't know about things outside your field of knowledge." Third, recognize that emotional and social intelligence are just as important as analytical intelligence. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that logic alone can solve all problems or that emotions are irrelevant to good decision-making. Fourth, make time for direct experiences that take you out of your head. Whether it's nature, art, music, or deep human connection, these experiences provide a different kind of wisdom than abstract thinking can offer. Fifth, cultivate compassion as an antidote to intellectual isolation. The more you can feel connected to others through shared humanity, the less likely you are to fall into the trap of detached, abstract thinking, disconnected from human reality. Sixth, be selective about what information you consume. Quality matters more than quantity. Make time for deep reflection rather than endless input. And finally, remember that the ultimate goal isn't to be the smartest person in the room, but to live well. Intelligence is a tool, not an end in itself. Use it wisely, but don't be ruled by it. As we wrap up this exploration of Schopenhauer's hidden insight about why smart people act like idiots, I want to leave you with one final thought. Intelligence, as we typically understand it, is just one form of human excellence among many. It's a tool that can be used well or poorly, a capacity that can lead to wisdom or folly depending on how it's cultivated and directed. The truly wise person isn't necessarily the one with the highest IQ or the most impressive credentials. It's the one who understands the limitations of their own mind, who balances intellect with compassion, who values direct experience alongside abstract knowledge, and who uses their intelligence in service of a good life rather than as a substitute for one. So next time you encounter a brilliant person doing something incredibly stupid, remember Schopenhauer's insight. Intelligence isn't a guarantee of wisdom. It's just a tool, and like any tool, its value depends entirely on how it's used. What do you think? Have you noticed smart people doing foolish things? Or maybe you've caught yourself using your intelligence to rationalize rather than to discover truth. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's continue this conversation. Because these are the kinds of questions that have the power to change how we see ourselves and the world. And remember, as Schopenhauer himself taught us, sometimes the greatest truths are found not in what we achieve with our intellect, but in what we learn to let go of. Now let's piece together what we've uncovered and explore how Schopenhauer's insights can transform our understanding of intelligence and ultimately our lives. Schopenhauer's philosophy reveals a stark but liberating truth. The pursuit of knowledge and understanding, while valuable, does not necessarily lead to wisdom or happiness. Instead, it often opens the door to a peculiar kind of foolishness that only the intelligent are capable of. But this realization, paradoxically, is also a gateway to something better, a more balanced relationship with our own minds and a deeper understanding of human nature. To truly embody Schopenhauer's teachings, we must embrace several key principles. First, accept the duality of intelligence. Schopenhauer taught that intelligence is neither good nor bad in itself. It's a tool that amplifies whatever it serves. When it serves the blind striving of the will, it leads to sophisticated forms of foolishness. When it serves self-awareness and compassion, it can lead to wisdom. This acceptance means neither glorifying intelligence as the highest virtue nor dismissing it as worthless. Instead, we recognize it as one faculty among many, valuable in its proper place, but dangerous when overvalued. When you stop expecting intelligence alone to solve all problems or lead to fulfillment, you free yourself from unnecessary disappointment. You learn to cultivate other qualities alongside it: intuition, compassion, aesthetic sensibility, practical wisdom, creating a more balanced approach to life. Second, practice the art of detachment from your own thoughts. A recurring theme in Schopenhauer's philosophy is the importance of stepping back from the endless chatter of the intellect. He believed that much of our suffering comes from over-identification with our thoughts, particularly our desires and fears about the future. Detachment doesn't mean abandoning thought altogether, but rather learning to observe your thoughts without being completely captured by them. Think of it as holding your ideas lightly, rather than clinging to them desperately. This is especially important for intelligent people who often pride themselves on their thoughts and identify strongly with their intellectual positions. Learning to say, "I am having this thought," rather than "this thought is me," creates space for greater wisdom and less foolishness. Third, pursue deeper forms of meaning beyond intellectual achievement. For Schopenhauer, art, philosophy, and self-reflection were not just intellectual pursuits, but essential tools for navigating life's challenges. They allow us to step outside the ceaseless demands of desire and connect with something greater than ourselves. When you immerse yourself in great art, engage with profound ideas, or reflect deeply on your own experience, you're not escaping life, but enriching it. You're touching the timeless, the universal, the sublime. And in those moments, you transcend the limitations of your individual intellect and connect with something deeper. This is particularly important for highly intelligent people who often seek meaning exclusively through intellectual achievement. Schopenhauer reminds us that the most profound forms of meaning often come through experiences that transcend the intellect rather than through it. Fourth, cultivate compassion as the ultimate antidote to intellectual isolation. One of Schopenhauer's most profound insights was the power of compassion to break down the barriers between self and other that intelligence often reinforces. Compassion allows us to see beyond the boundaries of our own experience and extend understanding to others. It doesn't just benefit those around us, it transforms us by breaking down the isolation that excessive intellectualization can create. This is crucial for intelligent people, who often find themselves separated from others by their different ways of thinking or specialized knowledge. Compassion bridges these gaps, reconnecting us to shared human experience in a way that pure intellect cannot. Fifth, quiet the endless striving of the will through mindfulness and acceptance. The ultimate goal of Schopenhauer's philosophy is not to escape life, but to find peace within it. This peace comes from quieting the endless desires of the will and cultivating a state of inner calm. Practices like mindfulness, meditation, or simply spending time in nature can help achieve this state. When you learn to be present with what is rather than constantly striving for what could be, you step outside the cycle of desire and disappointment that drives so much human suffering. Imagine sitting by a still lake, watching the water reflect the sky. In that moment, when your mind is quiet and your heart at peace, you're experiencing what Schopenhauer believed we could all achieve if we learn to quiet the will and its servant, the intellect. As we conclude this journey into Schopenhauer's hidden insight about why smart people often act like idiots, let's revisit the question we began with. Is intelligence a blessing or a burden? The answer, as we've seen, is both. Intelligence can lead us astray, burden us with overanalysis, and reveal uncomfortable truths about life. But it can also help us navigate complexity, appreciate beauty, and connect with others through understanding and compassion. The key is not to abandon intelligence, but to put it in its proper place, as one faculty among many, valuable when balanced by other qualities, dangerous when worshipped as the highest good. Schopenhauer's teachings remind us that true wisdom lies not in escaping life's contradictions, but in embracing them fully. Intelligence is not just a trap, but also a key, not just a burden, but also a gift. The choice of how to use it is ours. So as you move forward, take a moment to reflect on what you've learned. How will you use your intelligence, not just to analyze the world, but to live well within it? How will you quiet the endless chatter of the mind and cultivate a sense of peace amidst life's chaos? And most importantly, how will you connect with others, not despite your intelligence, but because of it? Remember, as Schopenhauer taught us, the greatest insights often come from embracing the paradoxes of existence. Intelligence is not just a source of folly, it's also a path to a deeper, more authentic life, if we have the wisdom to use it well.